Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Crystal, and I wanted to talk about the books that I have read the first 2 weeks of January. So this is everything from January 1st through January 13th. So I started off and I read Hurricane Wars. It had lots of political intrigue. It was a slow burn romance, and I liked the female and male main characters, but I thought that it needed some more world building and it needed more explanation of the magic system. The Hurricane Wars, it started off as Rilo fan fiction, and then the author got picked up, so then she turned it into her own story. But you can definitely tell that the two main characters are inspired by Kylo and Rey. And it wasn't that it was a bad book, but I just felt like it needed more. I gave it 3.5 stars. It follows these two characters. The female main character, she is fighting a war against this empire, and she can do light magic. And then the emperor's son, he is on the other side of the war, and he has dark magic. And they have basically wiped out all of the light magic wielders. So they thought, until the two main characters are on a battlefield and they see each other. He sees her wielding some light magic, and he's intrigued by her, so he doesn't kill her right off. And then their paths keep crossing. Eventually she finds out that she's like this lost heir, and they end up in an arranged marriage. So it has this enemies to lover and arranged marriage tropes in there. I don't know if I'll pick up book 2 because it's supposed to be a trilogy. I don't know. I haven't decided yet. And then the next book that I read was Thornhedge. And so this is a Sleeping Beauty retelling. And I was really into the past few months reading retellings. And this actually takes the Sleeping Beauty story and kind of turns it on its head. Of this main character, her name is Toad. We find out that she was taken from her parents. She was supposed to be a princess, but the fairies took her away and spirited her off into the realm of the fairies. And at some point, she gets sent back to the human realm. And even though for her it's been years, many, many, many years, and she's grown up, she's an adult now, in the human realm it's only been a few days after her actual birth. But she was replaced by a fairy. So this is a book about changelings, and she comes there. She is supposed to give a blessing to this changeling child so it can't do any harm. But when she goes to get the blessing, things go wrong, and she ends up stuck in the human realm, and she's supposed to make sure that this changeling child doesn't do anything horrible. And the changeling is the Sleeping Beauty because she ends up having to put this child to sleep because she doesn't want to kill the child. And the child is horrible because it's not really human. It's this fairy that is a very, very bad fairy. And so I really, really enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars. And it was only 111 pages. I finished it in an hour. I really wish that it had been longer. I think it could have been a longer book, and it would have been fantastic. Next book that I read, Our Hideous Progeny. It is Frankenstein inspired, and I really, really loved this book. It was just beautifully written. It was very heart-wrenching. It takes the original inspiration of Frankenstein, and we follow Frankenstein's great niece. She has married a scientist, and she herself is a scientist, and they are down on their luck. Things have happened. They have not had the best life together. There is they lost their child right after their child was born, and so they're looking to make their mark in science, and they need something before all of their money runs out. And she finds her great uncle's journal, and so they're like, this is it. What can we bring back something back to life. We're going to have to do these experiments, and then we will leave our mark in the science community, and we'll be really has a lot of the same themes as Frankenstein, as well as new themes. Society in which this main character has grown up in, it brings about how there was such stark differences between how women were treated, especially in science, versus men. And then you also have, as she keeps getting abandoned by everybody. And so there were just so many things in this book that were just so well written. And it was like hauntingly beautiful. I highly recommend. Gave Our Hideous Progeny 5 stars. It was a fantastic read, absolutely. The next book I read was also 5 stars, and it was Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. I finally read this book, and it is World War II mixed with, I think, World War I, World War II, that sort of era, mixed with fantasy. So you have these gods who have been asleep for centuries, and so everyone thinks that their stories are almost myths until one of the gods wakes up and he starts a war. He's looking for this other goddess, and he is determined to find her, even if he has to lay waste to the whole world. So they each have human soldiers that are fighting for their own side. And our main character, her brother gets called into the goddess's side of the war, and he goes to fight, and he's been gone for a few months, and Iris is very heartbroken and sad. And after her brother had left, their home life just fell apart. It was her and her mother. Her mother became an alcoholic and just lost her job, and everything fell apart. Now it's Iris's responsibility to make sure she survives, and she's also trying to help her mother survive as well. And she has this typewriter, and as she's typing letters to her brother, she puts them into her closet, and the letters disappear. Eventually, someone writes back and says, "Hey, I'm receiving your letters, but I'm not your brother." And she's like, "Who is this person?" And she's also going through all of these emotions because she's like, "I've told this person all of this intimate details of my life and all the things that I'm going through." The person continues to write back, and they end up slowly falling for each other. Well, her job at the paper is, she has her own rival at the paper. His name is Kit. And so you kind of see her falling for Kit as well. She ends up eventually leaving her job at the paper, and she goes to be on the front lines of the war to report from the war. And Kit realizes that he loves her and he cannot let Iris go, so he goes to the front lines. And so it's their romance, and it follows them on the front lines of this war and how they fall in love, and you end up finding out that he was her pen pal. So it's a fantastic read. It was a tearjerker, but it was really well written. I really like how they blended history as well as fantasy elements. The only other thing that it kind of reminded me of the first Wonder Woman, where you have fantasy and real world coming together. So I really liked it. And the next book that I read was Serpent and the Wings of Night. I didn't put this on my TBR for 2024 because I didn't know if my library was going to get it, and they got it, and I was first in line for it. It lived up to the hype. It was really, really good. We have this world, and it's filled with vampires and humans and magic. Both vampires and humans can have magic. You have humans who are at the bottom, and they are living in slums. And then you have some humans that are in another part of the world who do fight against the vampires, but that's not what this story is about. This story is about our character who it gets caught in the war between these 4 houses, but this one house hates this other house, and they're at war at the beginning. she's a child. Her village gets like caught in this mess, and she's about to be like killed by these vampires, and the king of the vampires finds her and scoops her up and takes her home as his adopted daughter. And he trains her, and then it picks up after that where she's now a grown adult, and she is entering in this tournament because every 100 years the goddess of the vampires, this goddess created the vampires, and she holds this tournament. And at the end of the tournament, you get a wish, and she will grant you whatever wish. And so Nyaxia is the goddess, and this human wants to become this specific thing so she can be her adopted father's like actual daughter in truth, so she can have like all of his powers, and they can but she's not going to become a vampire herself because she doesn't want to be a vampire. She hunts vampires at night. She doesn't tell her dad this, but she hunts them and she kills them, and she sees them for the horrible creatures that they are. So she enters into this tournament so she can get a wish from Nyaxia. And throughout this tournament, there's this other vampire that she ends up falling for. They create a bond. They have to join together in order to survive. And it's their romance, and it's also all of the trials that they face together in this tournament as well as outside of the tournament. There's also this war that sparks while the tournament's going on, and she knows that her father's lying to her, but she's not quite sure exactly what's happening. And the story is just filled with not only political intrigue, enemies to lovers as well. Really loved it. I gave this 5 stars too. And then I read Butcher and Blackbird. Okay, so this, I don't even know how to describe this book. It is a serial killer romance. And it is a rom-com with serial killers. Okay. So we have these 2 characters, and one is the butcher, one is the blackbird, and they hunt other serial killers. And their paths cross at the very beginning of the book, and the butcher is so fascinated by Blackbird, and he falls in love with her, and he's kind of been a fan of hers for quite a while, and she's heard of him, but she's not like fangirling over him like he is her. She's in a tight spot, but he gets her out of it, and he's like, hey, every year let's do this tournament where we go head to head and see who can catch this serial killer, because that's what they do in addition to their regular daytime lives. So every year they meet and they just try to see who can get to the serial killer first and who gets the win. It's like funny and hilarious, and then there's like these little like romance parts to it, and you have like these cute little parts, and overlaid is like these horrific, horrible things that are happening. Like there's dead bodies, there's body parts. It's grotesque and cute and funny all at the same time. I gave it 4 stars. I liked it. It's something else, let me tell you. But if that sounds like something that you would like, I recommend it. And then last I read Alice by Christina Henry. Oh, this book. It was a short book, but it was something. So it is a horror fantasy novel with Alice in Wonderland inspired characters. It basically takes the world and the characters of Alice and the caterpillar and the rabbit, and all of these characters are magicians. We start off, Alice has been at 16. She was tricked into going into this part of the city that's a bad part of the city, and she was assaulted and held for 2 weeks. She escaped, and when she escapes and she makes it back to regular society that's not in the old town, she is kind of lost her mind. She just keeps saying something about this rabbit and this man that hurt her. And so she ends up getting put into an asylum. And in the asylum, she meets up with Hatcher, who is her next door neighbor. His cell is right next to hers. They strike up a friendship. They are in there for many, many years. By the time the place starts to burn and they escape, she's an adult. And she and Hatcher flee as the asylum is burning, and Hatcher is saying that the Jabberwocky is going to be free. Well, the Jabberwocky is this evil magician who had been like in the asylum as well. So they take off, they flee. Well, it ends up being their journey through the old town and taking out these evil people who have each own part of the city. It was horrifying in a lot of parts. It was so well written, though. I really liked the book. I liked the fantasy elements. It took Alice in Wonderland into like this dark place, but it did it in a good, like in a good, terrifying way. I really liked the book, and I gave it 4.5 stars. This is all of the books I read for the first 2 weeks of January. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.